I'm sitting out here on this porch swing, rocking slow like I've got all the time in the world, and honestly, I wish I could tell you this is just a quiet summer evening, nothing more. But it's not. I'm 66 years old, and I just found out that the man I've been married to for 32 years has been bleeding me dry while planning to leave me with nothing. You know, I never thought I'd be telling anyone this. This is not the kind of story you share, the kind that makes people look at you different. But I'm telling you because somebody out there needs to hear this, and maybe it'll help you see what I couldn't see for so long. Maybe it'll save you from wasting another year, another dollar, another piece of your heart. If this story resonates with you, if it makes you feel something, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. Not for me, but because there's someone out there scrolling right now who needs to stumble across this video. Someone who needs permission to save themselves. Let's make sure they find it. Let me back up. I've been living in this senior living studio in Boston for about 3 years now. My room is small. Kitchenette against one wall. A bed pushed up against the window. A bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The window looks out at the community center where they have bingo on Thursdays and line dancing on Fridays. It's not much, but it was supposed to be mine. The down payment came from my mother's life insurance, $20,000 that felt like a blessing after she passed. That money was supposed to be my security blanket, my little nest egg for when I couldn't work anymore. I moved here because it felt safe. The hallways are shared, sure, but there's always somebody around. The building smells like coffee in the morning and dinner at night, everybody cooking their own versions of comfort. My studio has that same smell when I'm cooking. Gospel music pouring out of my little radio, Mahalia Jackson or the Staple Singers filling up the space while I mix my cornbread batter the way my grandmother taught me. When I first moved in, I spent weeks decorating. I hung my mother's picture above the little dining table, the one where she's smiling in her Sunday best, pearls around her neck. I placed doilies on every surface, the ones she'd crocheted during her last years. I arranged my spice rack by color, reds and browns and yellows in a row, each jar labeled in my own handwriting. The landlord had painted the walls beige, so bland it hurt to look at, but I hung up my cross-stitch pieces, Bible verses I'd worked on over the years. Be still and know that I am God. The Lord is my shepherd. Little reminders that I wasn't alone, even in this small space. My neighbors were kind from the start. Mrs. Chen from across the hall brought me homemade dumplings my first week. She didn't speak much English, but she smiled and pointed to the steaming basket, and I understood. Mr. Washington from downstairs knocked on my door to tell me about trash day and recycling rules. Young couple at the end of the hall, both nurses working night shifts, they waved when they passed. It felt like community. It felt like home. I had a routine back then. Wake up at 6, make coffee in my little percolator, the kind that bubbles and hisses on the stove, read my devotional while the sun came up, lighting up the rooftops across the street, shower, get dressed, head down to the community center to volunteer. I helped with the lunch program, serving meals to seniors who couldn't cook for themselves anymore. Ironic, isn't it? I was helping feed people while I was about to get eaten alive. My husband Richard moved in about 2 years ago, said his job was transferring to Boston, said he needed a place to stay while he figured out the details. We'd been married 32 years at that point, most of it long distance because of his work, but I figured this was our chance to finally be together full time. Then his son Derek, my stepson, showed up 3 months later. Derek's 41 now, never really settled down, and Richard said he just needed a few months to get on his feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. That's what you do for family. I remember the day Richard arrived. It was a Tuesday in September, one of those perfect fall days where the leaves were just starting to turn and the air had that crisp bite to it. He pulled up in his truck, a beat-up Ford with a dent in the passenger door. I'd been watching from my window, nervous like a teenager on a first date. 32 years married, and I was nervous to see my own husband. He'd packed light, just 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. I helped him carry them up the stairs, chattering the whole time about the building, the neighbors, where we'd put his things. He didn't say much, just nodded, grunted, looked around the studio like he was measuring it. When we got inside, he set his bags down in the middle of the floor and said, "This is smaller than I thought." I laughed it off, said we'd make it work, said it would be cozy. He didn't laugh with me. That first week I tried so hard. I rearranged everything to make room for his things, gave him half the closet, cleared out 2 drawers in the dresser, made space in the bathroom for his toiletries. I cooked all his favorite meals: pot roast on Monday, fried chicken on Wednesday, meatloaf on Friday. I set the table with my mother's good plates, the ones with the tiny pink roses around the rim. I poured sweet tea into the good glasses. I lit a candle, something vanilla-scented from the dollar store. I remember the first night they both stayed here. I made a pot roast, set the table with my mother's good plates, poured sweet tea into mismatched glasses. Richard barely looked at me during dinner. Derek ate fast and excused himself. I cleaned up alone, the gospel music still playing, and I told myself it was just an adjustment period. They'd been living alone for so long, they just needed time. But the adjustment never came. Richard's work schedule was strange from the start. He'd leave at 9 in the morning, come back at 4, then leave again at 6. Sometimes he wouldn't come back until after I'd gone to bed. I'd ask where he went, and he'd say, work, or errands, or out. Never any details, never any stories about his day, about his coworkers, about what he was actually doing. I tried to be understanding, tried to give him space, but it gnawed at me, that not knowing. I'd lie in bed at night, listening to the sounds of the building, the pipes creaking, someone's TV through the walls, and I'd wonder where my husband was, if he was safe, if he was thinking about me. When Derek showed up 3 months later, things got worse. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon, no warning, just knocked on the door with 2 garbage bags full of clothes and a backpack. Richard let him in like it was planned, like they'd discussed it. I was in the kitchenette making stew, and suddenly there was another person in my space, taking up room, using up air. Derek looked rough. He'd put on weight since I'd last seen him, his face puffy and tired. His clothes were wrinkled, like he'd been sleeping in them. He didn't hug me, didn't even really look at me, just dropped his bags by the couch and said, "Where can I put my stuff?" I scrambled to make room, cleared out the closet by the door, moved my winter coats to a box under the bed, set up the couch with clean sheets and pillows, went to the dollar store and bought him some hangers, a towel, a bar of soap. He didn't say thank you. Richard didn't either. That night at dinner, I asked Derek about his plans. He said he was looking for work, something in tech support or sales. Said he had some leads, just needed a few weeks to get on his feet. Richard nodded along, said Derek was a hard worker, said I shouldn't worry. But I did worry, because Derek didn't look for work, not that I could see. He'd sleep until noon, wake up and watch TV on his phone, eat whatever was in the fridge, then go back to sleep. Some days he'd leave with Richard and they'd be gone for hours. Other days he'd just stay in, barely moving from the couch. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. They'd have these low conversations, Richard and Derek, and when I'd walk in, they'd stop. Just stop mid-sentence and stare at me until I left. It was like I'd interrupted something secret, something I wasn't allowed to know about. It started with small things. Richard stopped saying good morning. He'd wake up, go straight to the bathroom, leave for work without a word. I'd make his coffee, leave it on the counter, and he'd take it without looking at me. Derek did the same. They became like ghosts in my own home, present but unreachable. I'd ask how their day was, and Richard would grunt. I'd try to kiss him goodnight, and he'd turn his face so I'd catch his cheek instead of his lips. The silence was the worst part. They'd sit together in the living area, talking low, and the second I walked in, nothing. Dead air. It was like I'd interrupted something private, something I wasn't allowed to know about. I started staying in the kitchenette more, standing at the counter while the fan spun overhead, the summer heat pressing against the windows. I'd stare at my recipe cards, the ones I've been writing on for 40 years, stained with butter and flour and tomato sauce. Those cards felt like the only proof I was real. I kept cooking. I kept cleaning. I kept trying. I told myself they needed me. Richard had always been forgetful with bills, always needed someone to organize his life. Derek had never been good with money, never held a job for long. I convinced myself that if I stopped taking care of them, they'd fall apart. So I stayed. I cooked their meals, washed their clothes, paid for groceries with my Visa card. I told myself this was love. This was what a wife does. This was what a mother does. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to look at it too close. I started noticing things I'd tried to ignore, like how Richard always had his phone face down, like how Derek would get packages delivered, things he'd order online, and he'd take them straight to his corner of the room without showing me. Like how they'd both have new clothes, new shoes, things I knew they couldn't afford on Richard's salary, things I certainly hadn't bought them. One morning, I was putting away laundry and I found a receipt in Richard's jeans pocket. Best Buy, $3,000. A laptop, a tablet, noise-canceling headphones. I'd never seen any of those things. When I asked him about it, casual like, he said it was for work. Said his company reimbursed him. But I'd seen our bank statements. I knew his paycheck. There was no reimbursement. I didn't push it. I wish I had. I gave up things to make room for them. I stopped going to choir practice at my church because Richard said the evening schedule was inconvenient. I stopped inviting my friends over for coffee because Derek said he needed quiet to focus on job applications. I stopped volunteering at the community center because I was always too tired, always too busy making sure Richard and Derek had what they needed. The day I quit the community center lunch program was one of the hardest days of my life. I'd been volunteering there for 2 years, and I loved it. Loved seeing the regular faces, loved hearing their stories, loved feeling useful. But Richard started complaining about dinner being late because I'd been gone all morning. Derek would make comments about the apartment being messy even though I was only gone 3 hours a week. So I went to the coordinator, a sweet woman named Linda, who'd always appreciated my help. I told her I couldn't volunteer anymore, that family obligations had gotten too demanding. She looked at me with these sad eyes and said, "Are you sure? We're going to miss you." I almost broke down right there, almost told her everything, but I didn't. I just nodded and left. I cried the whole way home. Stood in the elevator with tears streaming down my face, hoping nobody would get on at any floor. When I got back to the studio, Richard and Derek were both on the couch watching a basketball game. Neither of them asked where I'd been. Neither of them noticed I'd been crying. I even gave up my bedroom. Well, sort of. Richard and I still shared it, but he'd stay up late watching TV on his laptop, and I'd lie there in the dark, the fan spinning, feeling like a stranger in my own bed. He stopped touching me, stopped holding my hand, stopped looking at me like I mattered. The physical distance hurt more than I expected. We'd never been a particularly affectionate couple, not in the showy way some people are, but we'd always had these little moments, his hand on my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen, a kiss on the forehead before bed, holding hands during church service back when we used to go together. All of that stopped. He'd lie on his side of the bed, as far from me as possible without falling off, his back to me. If I tried to cuddle up to him, he'd stiffen, make an excuse about being too hot or too tired. If I reached for his hand, he'd pull away to scratch his nose or adjust his pillow. The rejection was constant, subtle, and completely devastating. I started sleeping in my clothes, just leggings and a t-shirt, because I felt too vulnerable in my nightgown. Started keeping a pillow between us, a barrier so I wouldn't accidentally touch him in the night and have him recoil. Started going to bed later and later, waiting until I knew he'd be asleep so I wouldn't have to experience that moment of him turning away from me. I should have left then. I know that now. But I couldn't. Because leaving meant admitting I'd wasted 32 years. Leaving meant admitting I'd been wrong about him. And I wasn't ready to face that. So I stayed. And I kept cooking. And I kept pretending. Here's what I gave up that I didn't even realize at the time. My mother left me more than just the insurance money. She left me her jewelry, a set of china that had been in our family for 3 generations, and about $8,000 in cash she'd hidden in a shoebox in her closet. When Richard asked me to consolidate everything into one account for easier management, I said yes. I put the cash in. I put the insurance money in. I even sold some of the jewelry and put that in too. He said it was practical. He said it would help us save for the future. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. The day I added Richard's name to my bank account, we were sitting at my little dining table. He'd brought the paperwork home, said his bank had recommended it for married couples, said it would make things easier, that I wouldn't have to worry about managing money alone. The forms were already filled out, just needed my signature. I remember holding the pen, looking at the signature line, feeling this flutter in my chest. Something was telling me not to sign, but Richard was watching, smiling, saying things like, "This is what partners do," and "Don't you trust me?" So I signed. Added his name to an account he'd never contributed to, giving him access to everything my mother had left me. The bank officer, a young woman with bright red lipstick, walked us through the changes. She explained that we'd both have full access, that either of us could withdraw or transfer funds without the other's permission. She asked if I was sure, said some couples preferred to keep separate accounts. Richard jumped in before I could answer, said we were old-fashioned, believed in sharing everything. I nodded along, smiled, signed the final form. When we left the bank, Richard was in a good mood, better than I'd seen him in weeks. He even took my hand as we walked to the car. I thought I'd done something right. I thought I'd made him happy. I also gave him my Visa card. Just for household expenses, he said. Groceries, utilities, things like that. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't check the statements. I trusted him because that's what you're supposed to do in a marriage, right? Trust. But trust is a funny thing. It's like a recipe card. Once it gets stained, you can still read it, but it's never quite the same. I remember one Sunday afternoon, I was sitting on the porch swing outside the building, rocking slow, watching people come and go from the community center. An older woman sat down next to me, someone I'd seen around but never really talked to. She asked how I was doing, and I said fine. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "You don't look fine, honey." I didn't cry. I just nodded. And she sat there with me until the sun went down. Her name was Helen. She was 74, had lived in the building for 5 years. She told me about her late husband, how he'd been difficult in his last years, how she'd lost herself trying to keep him happy. She didn't know my story. Not yet, but somehow she knew I needed to hear hers. We sat there for over an hour, just rocking, watching the sky turn from blue to pink to purple. She didn't pry, didn't ask questions, just shared her story and let me sit with it. When she finally got up to leave, she squeezed my hand and said, "You're stronger than whatever's trying to break you. Don't forget that." I thought about those words every day after that, turned them over in my mind like prayer beads. You're stronger than whatever's trying to break you. But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out, like a gourd scraped clean. That's when I realized I'd been lying to myself for 2 years. I wasn't fine. I was disappearing. The exclusion got worse after that. Richard and Derek started going out without telling me where. They'd leave in the morning and come back at night, and when I asked where they'd been, Richard would say, "Nowhere," or "just out." Derek wouldn't even answer. He'd just walk past me to his room and close the door. One time I asked if I could come along, just to get out of the apartment, just to feel like part of something. Richard looked at me like I'd asked to borrow a kidney. He said, "We're just running errands. You'd be bored." I stayed home. I made cornbread. I listened to gospel music. I cried into my dish towel where nobody could see. There were little cruelties too, things I didn't even recognize as cruel until later. Richard stopped acknowledging my birthday. Derek never said thank you when I cooked. They'd leave messes and expect me to clean them. They'd use up the last of the milk and not replace it. They'd make plans without me, talk about their plans in front of me, and act like I wasn't even there. My birthday that year was the worst. I'd turned 66, which felt like a milestone somehow. Not 65, not 70, but 66 felt significant to me. I'd woken up that morning with this little flutter of hope, thinking maybe Richard would remember. Maybe he'd get me a card, or take me to breakfast, or just acknowledge the day. He didn't. He got up, got dressed, and left for work without a word. Derek was still asleep on the couch. I sat at the dining table with my coffee, looking at my mother's picture on the wall, and I wondered what she would say if she could see me now. She'd always been so strong, so independent. She would have been disappointed. Around noon, I called my friend Sylvia from church. She remembered, of course. She sang happy birthday over the phone, her voice warm and slightly off-key. She asked what I was doing to celebrate. I lied, said Richard was taking me to dinner. She said that sounded lovely. I hung up and cried for 20 minutes. Richard came home that evening, and I thought maybe he'd remembered, maybe he was just waiting for the right moment. But he didn't say anything. We ate dinner in silence, leftover chicken and rice. Derek scrolled on his phone. Richard watched something on his laptop. I washed the dishes and went to bed early, listening to them laugh at something in the other room, something I wasn't part of. I became a servant in my own home. No, worse than that. Servants get paid. I started to wonder if I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I wasn't pretty enough anymore. Maybe I'd gained too much weight. Maybe my voice was too loud. Maybe I asked too many questions. I started apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I started making myself smaller, quieter, less. And they still didn't see me. My faith got me through those months. I'd take out my choir robe from the closet, the one I hadn't worn in over a year, and I'd press it even though I had nowhere to wear it. I'd hold it against me and remember what it felt like to sing, to be part of something bigger than myself. I'd pray, asking God to show me what I was supposed to do, how I was supposed to fix this. But maybe God was waiting for me to fix it myself. The truth came in the most ordinary way. I was looking for Richard's phone charger one afternoon because mine had broken and I knew he had an extra. He and Derek were out, doing whatever it was they did all day. I opened his nightstand drawer, and there it was, his laptop, open, unlocked. I should have closed it. I should have respected his privacy. But something told me to look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was God. I looked. My hands were shaking as I pulled the laptop closer. The screen was bright in the dim bedroom, the fan clicking overhead. Gospel music playing faintly from the other room. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast in my ears. Part of me wanted to close it, to walk away, to keep living in ignorance. But I couldn't. Something in me knew that whatever I was about to find would change everything. The first thing I saw was an email chain between Richard and Derek. The subject line said, "Exit plan." My hands started shaking before I even read the first message. Richard had written, "Once we liquidate the rest of the assets, we're out. I'm thinking by the end of August. The house in North Carolina is almost ready. Derek's got the job lined up. We just need to drain the account and we're done." Derek replied, "What about her?" Richard replied, "What about her? She signed everything over. It's legal. She'll figure it out." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at those words. She'll figure it out. Like I was a problem to be solved, not a person, not his wife, not someone he'd promised to love and honor. The room started spinning. I had to put my head between my knees, breathe slow, tell myself not to pass out. My mouth went dry. My hands went cold. I felt like I was watching myself from somewhere else, like this was happening to someone else's life. But it wasn't. It was mine. This was my life, my marriage, my money, and it was all a lie. I kept reading. There were bank statements attached. My bank account, the one Richard had convinced me to put his name on. Over $30,000 had been moved out in the last 18 months. Small transfers at first, 500 here, 1,000 there. Then bigger ones, 3,000, 5,000. The Visa card had been maxed out at $15,000. I didn't even know what he'd bought. The statements showed charges at car dealerships, furniture stores, luxury retailers, things I'd never seen, things that never came home. I clicked through the statements, each one worse than the last. Best Buy, $3, $200. Ashley Furniture, $4, $800. Men's Warehouse, $1, $600. Bob's Discount Furniture, $2, $900. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to, bars I'd never heard of. A charge for $800 at a jewelry store. Who was he buying jewelry for? Not me. I hadn't gotten so much as a birthday card. There were property records, too. A house in Charlotte, North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a 2-car garage. The down payment had come from my account. $22,000. My mother's insurance money. The money that was supposed to keep me safe. I clicked on the listing. Saw photos of the house. It was beautiful, actually. Brick exterior, white trim, a front porch with columns, hardwood floors, granite countertops, a backyard with a fence. The kind of house I'd dreamed about when I was younger, before Richard, before all this. And he'd bought it. With my money. For him and Derek. Not for me. And then I saw the email about the car. A Lexus LS in champagne gold. Richard had been looking at it for months, pricing it out, planning how to finance it. He wanted to buy it with my money and drive away in style. The email was to a dealer in Charlotte. Richard had written, "I'll be relocating in August and would like to finalize the purchase then. Can you hold the vehicle? I can put down a deposit now." The dealer had responded with financing options, color choices, add-ons. Richard had replied asking about the premium sound system and leather interior. He was planning his exit down to the last detail. The house, the car, the job for Derek, the date they'd leave. Everything was arranged. Everything except what would happen to me. I sat there for I don't know how long. The fan spun above me. The recipe card sat on the counter, stained and worn. The gospel music had stopped hours ago. Everything was quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. The sun moved across the floor, the light changing from bright to dim. My legs went numb from sitting. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't process what I was seeing. 32 years, 32 years of marriage, and this is what it came to. An exit plan, a subject line in an email. What about her? She'll figure it out. I thought about all the times I'd defended him to my friends, all the times I'd made excuses for why we lived separately, why he didn't call, why he didn't visit. I thought about the money I'd sent him over the years, the bills I'd paid, the times I'd gone without so he'd have enough. I thought about my mother, working herself to death as a housekeeper, saving every penny so I'd be secure. And I'd given it all to a man who saw me as an inconvenience. That night, I didn't make dinner. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't cook. The cornbread mix stayed in the cupboard. The oven stayed cold. When Richard and Derek came home, they looked at the empty counter and asked what was for dinner. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice was gone. Derek got annoyed. He said, "Seriously, We've been out all day and you couldn't even make dinner?" I still didn't answer. I went to my room, the one I shared with Richard, and I lay down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling and I thought about all the years I'd spent cooking for him, cleaning for him, believing in him. All those years, and this is what it came to. An exit plan, a house I'd never see, a car I'd never ride in, a future that didn't include me. Richard came in later. He stood in the doorway and asked what was wrong. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized I didn't know this man. Maybe I never had. I said, "I know." He went pale. He said, "Know what?" I said, "Everything." He tried to lie. He said I was misunderstanding, that the emails weren't what they looked like, that he was just planning ahead, that he'd never leave me. But I'd seen the paperwork. I'd seen the dates. I'd seen the numbers. He started talking fast, words tumbling over each other. Said the house was an investment, that he was going to surprise me, that he was planning to bring me down there once it was all set up. Said the money transfers were for repairs on the house, for furniture, for deposits. Said he didn't tell me because he wanted it to be a surprise. But I'd read the emails. I'd seen what they said about me. I'd seen what about her, and she'll figure it out. Those weren't the words of a man planning a surprise. Those were the words of a man planning an escape. I told him to get out of my room. He didn't move, so I got up and I walked out instead. I slept on the porch swing that night, the one outside the building. It was summer, warm enough that I didn't need a blanket. I rocked slow, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, the distant traffic, the hum of the community center's lights. I watched the sunrise, pink and gold, and I thought about how I'd let myself become invisible. But I wasn't invisible. Not really. I was still here, and I was done disappearing. The next morning, I called the community center and asked to speak to someone, anyone. They connected me with a social worker named Margaret. I'd seen her around before, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense way of speaking. I sat across from her in a small office that smelled like coffee and old carpet, and I told her everything. The money, the emails, the house, the car, the exclusion, the silence, all of it. Margaret didn't look shocked. She just nodded and took notes. When I finished, she said, "You're not the first person I've seen this happen to, and you won't be the last, but you're smart for catching it now." She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notepad. "I've been doing this work for 20 years, she said, "and I've seen every variation of this story. Husbands, wives, children, grandchildren, people who are supposed to love you, taking everything you have. The thing is, they always think they're going to get away with it, and sometimes they do, when people are too scared or too ashamed to come forward." She looked at me directly. "But you came forward. That takes courage." I didn't feel courageous. I felt humiliated, felt like the biggest fool in the world. But Margaret shook her head when I said that. "You're not a fool. You're a survivor, and now we're going to make sure you stay that way." She asked if I had copies of the emails. I said no, but I could get them. She told me to take photos with my phone, send them to myself, and delete them from Richard's laptop so he wouldn't know I'd seen them. She gave me the number for a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. She helped me make a safety plan in case Richard or Derek became violent. I didn't think they would. But then again, I didn't think they'd steal from me either. Margaret walked me through the safety plan step by step, who I should call if I felt threatened, where I should go if I needed to leave quickly. She gave me a list of shelters, safe houses, crisis hotlines. She made me memorize the number for the police, made me practice what I'd say if I needed to call 911. "I know this seems extreme," she said, "but when people get caught, they panic, and panic makes people dangerous. I need you to be prepared for anything." The lawyer's name was Patricia. She was younger than me, maybe in her 40s, with a sharp suit and a sharper mind. She looked over the emails and the bank statements and said, "This is theft, this is elder abuse, and we can stop it." Patricia's office was downtown, in one of those old buildings with creaky elevators and frosted glass doors. Her desk was covered in case files, sticky notes, half-empty coffee cups. She looked tired but determined, like someone who'd been fighting these battles for years and hadn't lost her fire yet. She walked me through what would happen next. We'd freeze my accounts to prevent further theft. We'd file a police report for fraud and elder abuse. We'd get a restraining order to keep Richard and Derek away from me, and we'd file a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. "I'm not going to lie to you," Patricia said. "This is going to be hard. It's going to be painful. You're going to have to relive all of this, tell your story over and over. But at the end, you'll be free, and you'll have your money back, or at least most of it." She told me we needed to act fast. She helped me freeze my bank account so Richard couldn't take any more money. She helped me freeze my credit so he couldn't open new accounts in my name. She filed a police report. She started the process of getting a restraining order. I felt like I was watching someone else's life. How had I gotten here? How had I become the kind of woman who needed a lawyer and a social worker and a police report just to protect herself from her own husband? But I did need them, and I was grateful they existed. Richard and Derek didn't know anything was happening at first. They kept going about their days, leaving in the morning, coming back at night. I started cooking again, just to keep up appearances. But I didn't eat with them. I didn't talk to them. I was waiting. Those days were some of the strangest of my life. I'd wake up, make breakfast, watch them eat in silence. I'd clean up, do laundry, go about my day like everything was normal. But inside I was screaming. Inside I was planning. Every move I made was calculated, careful. I couldn't let them know I knew. Not yet. Margaret checked in with me every few days. She asked how I was holding up, if I felt safe, if I needed anything. I told her I was fine, but the truth was, I didn't know what I was. I felt angry and sad and scared all at the same time. I felt like a fool for not seeing this sooner. I felt like a coward for not leaving sooner. But Margaret said something that stuck with me. She said, "You're not a fool. You're someone who loved and trusted. That's not a weakness. It's just that the person you loved wasn't worthy of it." I cried when she said that, not because it was sad, but because it was true. The confrontation happened at a restaurant downtown. Derek had gotten a job offer in North Carolina, some kind of management position at a tech company. He was so proud of himself. Richard wanted to celebrate, so he made reservations at a fancy steakhouse, the kind of place with white tablecloths and wine lists. He told me I had to come, said it was a family occasion. I almost said no. But then I thought, this is my moment. This is when I tell them. So I went. I wore my nicest dress, the navy blue one I'd been saving for church. I put on my mother's necklace, the one I hadn't sold. I did my hair and my makeup, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw myself for the first time in years. The restaurant was one of those places that makes you feel underdressed no matter what you're wearing. Dark wood, low lighting, soft music playing in the background. The hostess led us to a corner table, brought menus the size of newspapers, rattled off specials I couldn't afford. We sat at a corner table. Derek ordered champagne. Richard ordered a steak. I ordered water. The waiter brought bread, and they tore into it like they hadn't eaten in days. I didn't touch it. Derek started talking about the new job, the salary, the benefits, the house they'd bought in Charlotte. Wait, they'd bought. Not we. They. Richard nodded along, smiling, saying how proud he was. The waiter brought the champagne, poured it into 3 glasses. Derek raised his and said, "To new beginnings." Richard raised his glass. I didn't. They both looked at me. Derek said, "What's your problem?" I said, "I know about the house." The table went quiet. Richard set his glass down, Derek's smile disappeared. I said, I know about the money. I know about the exit plan. I know about the Lexus. I know everything. Richard tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I said, I froze the bank account. I filed a police report. You can't touch another dollar of my money, and if you try, you'll be arrested. My voice was steady, calm, even though inside I was shaking. I'd practiced this moment in my head 100 times. I'd stood in front of my bathroom mirror, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd say it, and now here I was, actually doing it. Derek stood up so fast his chair fell over. He started yelling, saying I was crazy, saying I was ruining his life, saying I was ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. People at other tables turned to look. The waiter came over, nervous, asking if everything was okay. I stayed calm. I said, everything they did for me? Like steal my inheritance? Like plan to leave me with nothing? Like treat me like I didn't exist? The waiter backed away. Other diners were openly staring now. Derek's face was red, his hands clenched into fists. Richard grabbed his arm, trying to calm him down, but Derek shook him off. You're going to regret this, Derek said, his voice low and threatening. You think you're so smart, but you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I stood up, looked him right in the eye, said, the biggest mistake of my life was letting you and your father into my home. But I'm fixing that now. Richard tried to grab my hand. I pulled away. He said, we can work this out. We can talk about this at home. I said, you don't have a home. You have 30 days to move out. My lawyer will send the paperwork tomorrow. I stood up, left money on the table for my water, and walked out. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear Derek still yelling, Richard trying to calm him down, the restaurant buzzing with whispers. I didn't care. I walked out into the warm summer evening, and I took the longest breath of my life. The air outside tasted different, cleaner, freer. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. People walked past, going about their evening, oblivious to the fact that my entire life had just changed. A couple laughed as they entered the restaurant. A man hailed a taxi. Somewhere down the street, a street musician was playing saxophone, the notes floating through the warm air. I started walking, didn't know where I was going, didn't care. Just walked, my heels clicking on the pavement, my mother's necklace catching the streetlights. I felt powerful. I felt seen. I felt real. The consequences came faster than I expected. The police opened an investigation into the bank fraud. Patricia, my lawyer, filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen money. The bank froze Richard's access to everything, including the accounts he'd opened in his own name using my money as collateral. Derek's new job offer fell through. Turns out the company did a background check and found out about the investigation. They rescinded the offer. The house sale in Charlotte fell apart because they couldn't get financing without access to my account. Richard tried to get a loan, but his credit was terrible without my money propping it up. They had to move out of my studio. They went to a motel on the outskirts of Boston, one of those weekly rate places with stained carpets and flickering lights. Derek called me, begging, saying they had nowhere to go. I told him that wasn't my problem anymore. Richard tried one last time. He showed up at the community center, waited for me outside, said he was sorry, said he'd made a mistake, said he wanted to make it right. I looked at him, this man I'd been married to for 32 years, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just nothing. I said, "You had 32 years to make it right. You chose to take instead." He left. I haven't seen him since. Margaret helped me through the worst of it. She connected me with a support group for elder abuse survivors, women and men who'd been through similar things. Hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't alone. I wasn't stupid. I was just someone who'd been taken advantage of by people who were supposed to love me. The support group met every Wednesday evening in the community center, in the same room where they did bingo on Thursdays. There were usually about 8 of us, ranging in age from early 60s to late 80s. Margaret facilitated, but mostly she just let us talk. The first time I went, I was terrified. Didn't want to share my story with strangers, didn't want to admit what had happened to me. But then I heard their stories. A woman whose daughter had stolen her Social Security checks for 3 years. A man whose son had forged his signature on a reverse mortgage. A woman whose caregiver had drained her savings account while she was in the hospital. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been betrayed by someone they trusted. And nobody judged. Nobody said, "How could you let that happen?" They just listened, nodded, understood. When it was my turn to share, I told them everything. About Richard, about Derek, about the exit plan and the house and the Lexus. About feeling invisible in my own home. About sleeping on the porch swing. About finding the emails. About the restaurant confrontation. When I finished, there was silence. Then an older man across the circle said, "You're brave. It took me 2 years to freeze my accounts. You did it in 2 days." A woman next to me squeezed my hand, said, "You saved yourself. That's not something everyone can do." I cried. They all cried with me. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I didn't feel alone. The lawsuit took months, but eventually we settled. Richard agreed to pay back most of what he'd stolen, though it took selling his truck and borrowing from his brother. Derek didn't pay anything, said he didn't have it. I didn't push it. I just wanted it to be over. I started rebuilding. Slowly. The first thing I did was turn off my phone for a whole day. Just one day. No calls, no texts, no emails, just silence. I sat on the porch swing and rocked and watched the world go by, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I reconnected with the women I'd abandoned, the ones from the community center and the church. They welcomed me back like I'd never left. We started having coffee again, sitting on the benches outside, talking about everything and nothing. I joined a new choir at a church 3 blocks away. I started cooking again, not for Richard, but for the potlucks at the center, for my friends, for myself. I threw away the old recipe cards, the ones stained with years of cooking for people who didn't appreciate it. I started new ones. Fresh, clean, just for me. I met a woman named Doris who lived 2 floors up. She was 73, sharp as a tack, with a laugh that could fill a room. We started having dinner together once a week, taking turns cooking. She taught me how to make jerk chicken. I taught her how to make cornbread. We talked about our lives, our mistakes, our plans. She became my friend, my sister, my family. Doris had this way of making everything feel lighter. She'd been through her own struggles, lost her husband to cancer 5 years ago, raised 3 kids on a teacher's salary, survived breast cancer in her 60s. But she didn't let any of it make her bitter. She was joyful, genuinely joyful, in a way I'd forgotten was possible. We'd sit in her apartment, which was laid out exactly like mine, but felt completely different. She had plants everywhere, bright paintings on the walls, photos of her grandkids covering every surface. We'd eat dinner, and she'd tell me stories about her teaching days, about the kids who'd kept in touch, about the ones who'd come back years later to thank her. She never told me what to do about Richard, never gave me advice unless I asked. She just listened and laughed and reminded me that life goes on, that joy is possible, that I deserved good things. That's what I learned. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when blood walks away. I also started volunteering again, this time with Margaret's organization. I talked to other seniors about financial abuse, how to recognize it, how to protect themselves. I told them my story, the whole ugly truth, and I watched their faces change as they realized they weren't alone either. One woman came up to me after a session, tears in her eyes. She said, "My son is doing this to me right now." I didn't know what to call it. I gave her Margaret's number. I told her it wasn't too late. I told her she was worth saving, and I meant it. I started saving again. Not for a Lexus in champagne gold. That was never my dream. I'm saving for a mobile home somewhere warm, maybe Florida, maybe Texas. Somewhere I don't have to shovel snow, somewhere I can sit on a porch and rock and know that I'm safe, that I've earned it, that nobody's taking it from me. I think about Richard sometimes. I wonder if he feels guilty. I wonder if Derek ever thinks about what they did. But mostly, I don't wonder. Mostly, I just move forward. It's been 8 months now since that dinner, since the confrontation, since I took my life back. The summer has turned to fall, and now it's winter again, snow piling up outside the community center. But inside, I'm warm. Inside, I'm whole. I learned things I wish I'd known earlier. I learned that according to research, 68% of financial abuse victims are women, and the average age is 82. That means there are women older than me, right now, going through what I went through, thinking it's normal, thinking they deserve it, thinking they have no choice. I also learned that the World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 6 seniors worldwide suffers abuse. 1 in 6. That's not a small number. That's millions of people. That's someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's friend. It could be you. It could be someone you love. If you're out there listening, and someone is slowly making you invisible, slowly taking your things, slowly convincing you that you're nothing without them, I need you to hear this. You are wrong about that last part. You are everything. You always were. You just forgot. It's not too late to remember. It's not too late to fight back. It's not too late to rebuild. I did it at 66. You can do it too. Here's what I want you to do if you're in a situation like mine. First, document everything. Take photos, make copies, save emails. You'll need proof. Second, tell someone. A friend, a social worker, a lawyer, anyone who can help you see clearly. Third, protect your money. Freeze accounts, change passwords, remove access. Do it quietly, do it fast. Fourth, make a plan. Where will you go? Who will help you? What do you need to be safe? And fifth, trust yourself. You know something is wrong. You've known for a while. Stop ignoring that voice. There are resources out there. Margaret connected me with legal aid, financial counseling, support groups. I didn't have to pay for most of it. You don't either. The National Center on Elder Abuse has a hotline. Adult Protective Services exists in every state. There are lawyers who work pro bono. There are organizations that help survivors rebuild their credit, their savings, their lives. You are not alone. And you are not too old, too tired, or too far gone to start over. I'm proof of that. I still live in that little studio. But now it feels like mine. I painted the walls a soft yellow. I put up new curtains. I bought a small bookshelf and filled it with books I've always wanted to read. I have plants on the windowsill, green and alive. I have photos on the wall, not of Richard or Derek, but of my friends, my choir, my new life. The transformation of my space happened gradually. One Saturday morning, I woke up and looked around at those beige walls and decided I was done with beige. I went to the hardware store, spent an hour looking at paint samples, and chose a color called Morning Sunshine. Soft yellow, warm, hopeful. Painting that studio by myself was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done. I moved all the furniture to the center, laid down drop cloths, opened the windows. I put on my gospel music, rolled up my sleeves, and painted. It took me 3 days, working slow, taking breaks when my arms got tired. But when I finished and stood back to look at it, I cried. Good tears this time. The room looked different, felt different. It was mine now, truly mine, in a way it hadn't been before. I still make cornbread, but now I make it when I want to, not because someone expects it. I still listen to gospel music, but now it fills me with joy instead of distraction. I still rock on that porch swing in the evenings, but now I'm not waiting for someone to come home. I'm just being. Just existing. Just living. And that's enough. I don't hate Richard. I don't hate Derek. I just don't think about them much anymore. They made their choices. I made mine. We're all living with the consequences. But here's the thing. My consequences are freedom. Theirs are guilt and loss, and knowing they destroyed something they could have cherished. I got the better deal. I think about my mother sometimes, the woman who left me that insurance money, those heirlooms, that little nest egg. She worked her whole life as a housekeeper, saved every dollar she could, and left it to me because she wanted me to be safe. I wasted most of it on a man who didn't deserve it, but I saved some, and I'm building on that now. I think she'd be proud of me, not for staying as long as I did, but for leaving when I finally could. So here's my question for you. Have you lived this? Are you living this right now? Do you know someone who is? If the answer is yes, please reach out. To me, to someone, to anyone. Don't wait as long as I did. Don't waste years of your life on people who see you as an exit plan instead of a person. And if you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, even a little bit, I want you to know something. You deserve better. You deserve respect, love, safety, peace. You deserve to be seen. And if the people in your life can't see you, find people who can. I did, and it saved me. If this story helped you, or if you think it could help someone else, please share it. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me you're fighting back. Tell me you're free. Because the world needs to hear these stories. The world needs to know this happens. And the world needs to know we survive. I survived. So can you. Thank you for listening. And remember, you're worth saving. Always.